Welcome. In this lesson, we are going to talk about comparing objects. Let's get started. Our first learning goal is to be able to compare strings using the equals and compare to methods. Then we'll generalize this idea to other objects, and you need to be able to explain how the equal operator works and also be able to explain the concept of an alias in Java. In the code you see on your screen, we create two strings, str and str2, and we set them both equal to the word avocados. So both strings contain the exact same sequence of characters. At the end, we print line str equal str2. In other words, we're comparing them for equality, and the output will either be true or false. Now, it might surprise you that the output is actually false. Even though the two strings contain the same characters, and it is perfectly legal to use the equal operator to compare them, the equal operator does not actually compare the characters of the strings. So we need to figure out how we can correctly compare the strings, and then later on, what's actually going on here. The equals method is one of two methods we can use to compare strings, and its job is simply to determine if two strings contain the exact same characters. If they do, it returns true, otherwise it returns false. So using our two strings from the previous slide, we say str dot equals str2, and now we get the result we expect, which is true. Of course, you could write this the other way and say str2 dot equals str. The order does not matter. Typically, when you're using the equals method, you will probably use it in an if statement. You can see an example here on the slide where we say if str dot equals str2, go ahead and do something, in this case, a print line statement. Compare to is the second method we can use to compare strings, and like equals, it can tell us if two strings are exactly the same, but it can do more than that. It can also tell us if one string comes before or after another alphabetically. And in computer science, A is going to be smaller than Z. So Z is bigger, A is smaller. And if we look at our example, we say string str dot compare to cat. And this is going to produce a result that is an integer. And if the result is bigger than 0, that means that our string str is larger than cat later in the alphabet. If the result is less than 0, a negative number, that means that str is smaller than cat, that it's earlier in the alphabet. And finally, if the result is exactly 0, that means str is equal to cat, that those two strings are the same word. Just like with the equals method, the typical use case of compare to is going to be an if statement. In this example, I say if str.compare to str2 is greater than 0. Now, it can be a little confusing looking at this, determining exactly what it's asking, and your clue is the greater than sign. When you see the greater than sign, greater than 0, we're asking, is the first string bigger than the second string? Is it further in the alphabet? If we said less than 0, we would be asking if the first string was earlier in the alphabet. And of course, if we said equals 0, we would be asking if they are the exact same string. We know that compare to gives us a numerical result, either negative or positive or 0, but how does it work? Well, the first thing it does is it finds the first two characters that differ between the two strings. So in this case, we compare cactus to cat, and the first letter is C for both words. The second letter is A for both words. So we have to get to the third letter until we find a difference. And then Java will go ahead and subtract the numerical value of those characters. So in this case, a C is a 99, a T is a 116, and 99 minus 116 gives us negative 17. Notice that that is a negative result. And because that result is less than 0, we can say that cactus is less than cat, which means that cactus comes earlier in the alphabet than cat does. Before we move forward, let's do a quick understanding check on compare to. In this example code, I have an if statement that will either print yes or no. Pause the video, think about the code, determine the output, and when you're ready, we'll talk about the answer. The first comparison we make is the word fern to the word farm, and we ask if fern is greater than farm. In other words, does fern come later in the alphabet? And it does, so this evaluates to true. The second thing we do is we have an equals, and we compare cat with a capital C to cat with a lowercase c, and we compare using the equals methods. And since capital C and lowercase c are different characters, this evaluates to false. And remember, with an and, both of them would have to be true, so we go to the else and we end up printing no. The whole reason we need an equals and compare to method is because using equal to compare strings does not work, and we want to explore why. So let's start by talking about a couple of primitive values, and we know that we can compare primitives correctly with equal. So in this example, I've got int x equals 24, int y equals 24, and we print line x equal y. And this result is going to be true because when Java goes to look at the memory slot for x, it will find a 24. It will find the exact same value in the y slot. Those memory slots contain the exact same information, and so Java will determine that this is a true statement. X does equal y. Now let's go back to the example we saw at the very beginning of the lesson where we took two strings and tried to compare them with equal. We were expecting to get true, but we got false. Let's see why. So we know now from the previous slide that when Java compares with equal, it takes a look at the memory slots to see if they have the same information. So with the primitives, not only did the x and y slots both contain numbers, they both contained the same number, 24 in this case. However, we're going to see that this is not the case with the strings. Yes, it's true that str contains a reference, and so does str2, but they reference two different objects. And so this is why Java evaluates str equal str2 as false. For objects, equal is comparing the references, not the actual content of the object, which is why classes like the string class will often contain an equals method. The job of this method is to compare those objects for logical equality. Let's quickly summarize what we've just talked about. So when we use the equal operator, it always compares the value in the memory slot. So with primitives, that means we're comparing the actual values. Does 24 equal 24? But with objects, this means the references. So when we say does str equal str2, we're not just looking to see that they're both references, but we're checking to see if they reference the same object. And so this gives us the results that it is true that x equals y. It is false that str equals str2, but using the dot equals method, str dot equals str2, which compares the characters, we get the expected result of true. To deepen your understanding of objects, references, and equal, let's look at an example. So in the first line of code, I create a point object p1 and set it equal to a new point 0, 0. For our purposes, a point is just an xy coordinate. In the second line, I create another new point object called p2, and in the third line, I say point p3 equals p2. Now notice, with this third line, I do not create a new point. Look what happens. P3 comes into existence, it equals P2, and notice that it is a copy of the reference. So when I say P3 equals P2, when I copy one object to another, I'm not creating a new object, I'm creating what's known as an alias. And an alias means that two or more references point to the same object. So P2 is a way to refer to this object, but so is P3. It's like the object has two different names, hence the word descriptor alias. Now, if we look at our print line statements, the first print line is P1 equal P2. And so this is going to be false because if we look at P1 and P2, they both contain references, but they refer to two different point objects. The same is true if we say P1 equal P3. Again, both references, but to two different objects. However, if we get down to P2 equal P3, this is going to be true because P2 and P3 both contain references and they both refer to the same object. In other words, the equal with objects will tell you if two object references are aliases of each other. Let's wrap up with an understanding check. There's some code on the screen and the code has several print line statements. Your job is to determine what gets printed. So pause the video and when you're ready, we'll walk through the solution. All right, let's take a look at our answers. So the output should be sour cream, true, true, and false. Let's see why. We already know the first line creates a new object, a new string object, and sets it equal to sour cream. The second line creates str2 and sets it equal to str1. Notice we're not making a new string. This actually creates an alias. So when we print line str2, str2 refers to our object sour cream, and that's why it prints sour cream. And likewise, when we print str1 equal str2, we have two references that refer to the same object, so we get a true. The third print line statement compares str1 and str2 with equals. Basically, it's comparing the string to itself, and it will have the same letters, so it outputs true. Finally, I make a change to str2. I say str2 equals a new string sour cream. Now look what that does. That actually changes the reference, so str2 no longer points to the first object, but now points to a new second object. And now when I compare str1 to str2 in my last line, this turns out to be false because str1 and str2 both references, but now referring to different objects. Now that you've watched this lesson, you should be able to compare strings using equals and compare to. You should also be able to explain how objects are compared using equal and explain the concept of an alias in Java.